Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of the Belgian Football Podcast. My name's Scott Coyne, and I'll be your host for this episode. And this episode is an episode that we've been looking to do for quite some time. Regular football fans may have been aware that last month KVO Oostende, as many people will know it, their bankruptcy was unfortunately confirmed, and they were the latest Belgian club to succumb to a long history in Belgium of bankruptcies of different kinds. Some of you may also know that I did some guest spots on other podcasts over the last few weeks as this story kind of spread around the footballing landscape. But we felt here at the Belgian Football Podcast that we really wanted to give this some space of its own and do a special episode with some particular guests who have really close personal connections to this story, guests who are from inside the club and were, right at the centre of this. I'm delighted to welcome three guests for this special episode. We're joined by Bram Keirsebilck, who up until recently was the press and comms manager at KVO, Peter van Nuffel, who's a former chair of the Kustboys Supporters Federation, and ex-KVO player Tony Obi, who has a very long connection with the club, both as a player and then after his playing career. Obviously, Tony was on the coaching staff and worked in a number of other roles behind the scenes at the club, and has, since moving to Oostende, I think in 1987, made his life in Belgium. So three fantastic guests have joined me to give us more of a detailed insight into events of the last few weeks. We probably should start at the beginning, and let's start with you, Bram. Can you maybe give people who might not be aware of the general context of what's happened over the last few months a little bit of a kind of potted history?
In the last few months, or do you want me to go back years? Because a lot of has happened during the years, of course.
Yeah, well, I was going to say actually that I think the story probably goes back pre-Pacific Media Group, doesn't it? Some of the issues perhaps start during Mark Cook's time as well. Take us back to the beginning as you see it.
Of course, when Mark Cook took over KV Oostende, we were just got promoted to the first division, but it was almost a certainty that the new relegation to the first division, to the second division, was going to happen. We didn't have much money. We didn't have a team to play in the first division. We have to be fair about that. And luckily, Mark Cook came then, and the whole of Oostende, the fans started dreaming. In his first season, we already played the final of Playoff 2, which we couldn't compete in because we didn't have a European license. But still, many players from second division still were playing. But thanks to Mark Cook, some key players were added to the squad, like Frank Berrier, Fernando Canezin, Jordan Lukaku. So Didier Ovono as a goalkeeper. So some reinforcements came. And thanks to Mark Cook, the team gradually got better. And after a few years, we even competed with the top teams in the Belgian competition. We played a few times Playoff 1. We played a cup final, which we unfortunately lost on penalties. And never to forget, we went to Marseille to play in European qualifying rounds. So all these things wouldn't have happened without Mark Cook. We have to be honest about that. But of course, in his latest years, before he went to Anderlecht to get on to buy Anderlecht, he, for example, signed Nicolas Lombards, a formerly Belgian Red Devil, to the team. Nicolas Lombards was a great guy to work with, by the way, but he cost a lot on the budget. So when Mark Cook left KV Oostende to go to Anderlecht, players like Lombards and others stayed at the club. But Mark Cook was not there anymore, and a lot of sponsors followed Mark Cook to Anderlecht. So KVO could not really afford it anymore to have these players. There was also the stand, which was built by Mark Cook and owned by Mark Cook. Also because he left to Anderlecht, there was some kind of deal on the stand where the club still needed to pay at first 1.2 million a year to like some kind of rent the stand. Afterwards, it went to 800,000 and even less. But it became difficult when Mark Cook left because some things, some debts and some expensive wages kept on going and going. And I think no one in Oostende blames Mark Cook really for leaving for Anderlecht, because as a businessman, that was an opportunity. We have to be honest about that. And we were all thankful for what have happened with him. But I think a lot of people do blame him with the fact that he left for Anderlecht, but that not everything in Oostende was well solved to continue. And that's what I think most people in Oostende blame him, that he was saying, I'm the number one fan of the team. Even when he bought KV Oostende, some journalists asked him, why do you buy Oostende? And his answer was, it's the only team I can buy because this team is in my heart. And of course, when all these things afterwards happen, then a lot of fans blame him for that. Although, like I said, we also had the great times with Markouke. So it's thin ice. It's a difficult one. It's black-white, and if it's somewhere in between. But of course, we need to say that it started when he left, and then things got difficult for the club. That's a fact.
Yes, we know that in sort of 2020, KVO are acquired by a multi-club ownership group that many football fans will be aware of, PFG, Pacific Media Group, and in most respects, that's really where the kind of the point that we're at now starts. I know that kind of looking from the outside at this, it always seemed to me that, and this is where, Tony and Peter will be able to help with this, I think, that the Oostende fans, there never seemed to be a close relationship between the new owners at that time, Pacific Media Group, and the fans. There seemed to be a disconnect to a certain extent. I mean, of course, there's one particular great season in here that we will discuss kind of shortly as well that happens in the middle of this period. But this is probably a good point to bring you in, Peter, actually, as an ex-chair of the Supporters Federation. What was that relationship like when Pacific Media Group came in, and how did that develop over time?
I think I was one of the first who had the opportunity to have to meet Paul Conway as representative of PMG in a meeting. And in that meeting, there were a lot of promises, and he tried to convince everybody who was in that room that day with a lot of stories, the big American dream. We will have cheerleaders, we will pizza stand, popcorn. It would be every week a big festival. But you saw clearly at him that he had, in my opinion, directly we saw that he had no direct feeling to what football was. Because the only relation he had to football was his database. Because he asked me at that day, who was, in your opinion, the best player you had last season? And I answered that it was Palaversa. It was really one of the best players we had in that year, previous PMG. And I said, oh, no. When I see my database, it was not a good one. And directly there was no way of discussion with him. It was his opinion and not a supporter's opinion. It was his database and not what a supporter saw. And that continued like that. Then we had the entry with Gauthier Ganay, who became the sportive director. The only thing he said, it was, what's in my database is okay. And I always laughed at it, that I said it was certainly an old Excel file from the years 1900, because none of the players he brought in, not players who came to KV Oostende and said, like Theate, I want to play here, but players he brought in, they never had any result in KV Oostende. So, and at a certain point, when we, as supporter federations, sent the mail to Conway, because Ganay wouldn't talk to the supporters, I got a phone call from Conway, who really, really abused me. He even threatened me that I wouldn't be able to get to the stands anymore. It was really that moment I said, that is not the right person. But it continued, lies after lies, always lies. Every story they told from in the beginning to the press and everything, you can think it off. Every time you can see it was a lie. And that continued until the end. Even if everybody knows that he was wrong, he was convinced that he was the only person who had the right solutions to get KVOs saved. And that's not true.
Yeah, it's interesting that it sounds like things started badly, to be honest, and obviously kind of got worse and accelerated over time as circumstances developed. Was that your experience as well, Tony? Because obviously you have such a long connection with the club, both as a player and then in a number of backroom roles as well over the years. You've seen different ownerships of the club and various different incarnations. What was your experience of that like?
Like Bram said, it started with Mark. I'm truly a believer, and that's proven more and more in football. If you don't have money, you can do very little in football, certainly to reach the top. You need really people that can lose money, or if they get into financial trouble, they've got something to back them up. It's a bit of an artificial system, because once these sort of rich people leave a club, then they leave the clubs sometimes with big debts. So that's the artificial side of it. So I'm not angry with Mark that he left. Like Bram said, he left us in a bad situation, and that should have been sorted. And that went obviously from bad to worse when PNG came. Why? Because I truly believe, and that's proven in all the teams that they've had so far, I think they prey on teams that are in trouble, that they can buy them for nearly nothing, that they can try to make a quick take in a short possible time by selling the best players when they arrive, or the most valuable sellable players, to get a quick money back for their investments. They then used, like Peter said, the data system to get new players in, players that in my eyes have never been scouted, have never been seen, and just been chosen because of their data. I'm an old-fashioned, old-school footballer that's really needs to see a player if I want to buy them. So if you're buying somebody unknown, it's a needle in a haystack. That's something that they a massive gamble from them. They think, we can say, we don't pay for them, they're all free transfers, but they let one good player go for reasonable money. They then, in their naivety, 3 or 4 free transfers come to the club, and that way they think from one of the 3 or 4, there might be one good one, and then they can sell them again. It's a really naive way of thinking, to be honest, because in fact they have to get 3 apartments or 4 apartments if it's 4 players, 4 cars, 4 wages. It's times 4. So I can't really understand how people like this can do business and are still in football, because they've wrecked already 5 or 6 teams now. All the teams have either been relegated or gone bankrupt. Their way of thinking is totally wrong. And as Peter and Bram said, with the discussion I had many chats with Conway, his way is the only way. You couldn't speak to him about things. He had an answer for everything, had totally zero empathy with supporters and with situations. His way was the only way. And that way, when you start to speak to people like that, it's a discussion that you can never win, because they're so sure of themselves that they will turn a discussion around in their favour.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because I think when you're running a club, no matter what your position is, having an excellent relationship with the fan base and having open communication and just this sense that, everybody's pulling in the same direction and is accessible is incredibly important to the atmosphere and the morale around a club and just the general sort of health and ecosystem within a club itself. And I think when you get an early indication that anything but that is the case and that there are a lot of worrying signs, then yeah, you definitely sort of have a problem. I think there's a sense with Pacific Media Group that they've never really had an idea about what they were doing in terms of their footballing operations. I mean, a lot of listeners will know that they've had involvement with a lot of clubs: Den Bosch in the Netherlands, Taishi in Poland, Barnsley in England, Esbjerg in Denmark, which is since ended. Nancy in France are in there as well. Nice going back a fair way, although they did sell Nice and made a good profit on that to a certain Jim Ratcliffe, who's now at Manchester United. another individual who probably, well, I more than probably, I would say, doesn't know how to run a football club. Some of the early indications there are very worrying as well. But then there's also minority stakes in Thun in Switzerland and in Kaiserslautern in Germany as well. And it just seems that the size of multi-club ownership models, the bigger the ownership model is, the more problems that come with that, because the more people that you're dealing with. Peter mentioned a little bit earlier the sporting director at the centre of a lot of this, Gotteg and I. Obviously, if you do some research, most people find that there's a real problematic track record of real failure in footballing terms. Here at the Belgian Football Podcast, we've had a little bit of interaction with Gotteg over the years, and always found him a very, very difficult character to talk to. Wasn't particularly helpful, didn't really answer questions, and was very evasive. And that seems to be how other people found how he handled all of his relationships. What was it like for you, Bram? Because obviously you were working with some of these individuals day to day as well. And as someone who works across press and comms, that must have been kind of very difficult, being the kind of public face of the club when there were things going on backstage, if you like, that were problematic for you.
Yeah, that was not always easy. Like you said, in the first year, it was still quite okay because we had a sportive good year with a fantastic coach, Alexander Blessin. That we have to say they did put in a good coach in the first year with Blessin. But already in the first year, I experienced, in general, a lack of communication internally, so also externally, and a lack of engagement towards the club with a lot of people. And of course, that was hidden a bit thanks to the good sportive results. But I already saw that in the first few months. It was not always easy to interact internally, to have some information on communication level. And of course, after some time, it really got problematic. I will give a few examples. Everybody knows that in the football world that we bought Michael Biron, striker of our sister club, AS Nancy in France. But he had a market value of about 500,000. We bought him from our own sister club for 5 million. And that's only because Nancy needed 5 million to obtain the license in France. So when you start doing these things, and then I need to write a press article where you say something like, yeah, he's not experienced enough to come to Belgium, so we loan him first to the French team, but it's really a good deal. Yeah, I have to say, I really had a lot of trouble with that. Of course, it's my job. They are my bosses, so I need to do my job, but I never did it without saying some things internally. Like there was one day where we didn't realize any transfer yet, but still 3 days in a row, we launched a transfer we did for Nancy. So I was like saying internally, but come on, we cannot do this anymore. We cannot communicate 3 days in a row a transfer for Nancy while we still need a lot of players. Yeah, of course we can, and just do it. And so it was really, really difficult. Even with Paul Conway, I'm talking about post-COVID. So in 2020, unfortunately, during our success season with Blessin, people were not allowed in the stadiums, or they only saw like 4 or 5 games. So of course, internally with the people from Oostende who work there, we said, yeah, we will have to compensate on the new season tickets the games they missed. Paul Conway didn't agree. He said they can be happy that they come back to the stadium. We don't have to compensate anything. Luckily, with the people from Oostende, we were able to do, even it was a minimum, but we were already happy to do something. Of course, the fans still criticized it because it was little, but we already were happy that we could do something. So one day a journalist phones me and he said, yeah, do you want to say something about fans which are not happy on the things, on the compensations they received? And I said something like, yeah, we are always able to talk with the fans. I'm always open to talk with the fans. I've always been. On some way or another, Paul Conway read the article where I said that, and he asked our Belgian COO to fire me. Because he said, yeah, what is this guy saying? We are not going to talk with the fans. Who is this guy that he will say this? So just to give you an idea, they live in their own worlds. There was no interaction with the fans. There was no engagement. To be fair, Gauthier sometimes did it. After I said a few times, you really have to talk with the fans now. And then this happened a few times. But it was like never a natural environment where it happens, which needs to be the case, I think. The fans need to be connected to the club. That's why, for me, in Germany, it's a fantastic system with the 51-49 share system. I don't say we need to do that in Belgium, but in general, fans and also sponsors need to feel more connected to the clubs. And with these foreign owners, it's very difficult to achieve that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, that underlines how difficult your job has been for you and how frustrating, when people, that you work with every day are effectively working against you and making your life and job much, much more difficult than it actually needs to be. Something I wanted to actually ask all three of you, because you might have a different answer. When was the point that for each of you realised where we really are in serious trouble here? Because often every day inside football clubs, people will have decisions that they disagree with and there'll be tensions and things like that. But do you remember the exact moment for each of you when you thought, okay, this isn't just difficult people, we've got relationship issues here, the very future and life of the club is genuinely at risk here? Do you remember when that was? What about you, Peter? Do you remember that moment for you?
For me, it was in the beginning of last season. I personally had since in that year, in April, May, different contacts with Michael Colt, Christian Sutt, people from inside the club like Frank Dirksen, Torsten Thijs, to have the right answers, the correct answers from what the situation was of KVO. And the first meeting with Michael Colt was and Christian Sutt, you don't have to worry, we will invest in KVO, you don't have to worry. A month later, the situation changed. Michael Colt was disappeared. Only Christian Sutt stays over with Conway and was it the other person? Doesn't matter. And the story, but we will find some money and we will do the necessary things. And then 14 days later, you get a call. We don't invest anymore in KV Oostende, not even €1. And then at that point, I said it will be very difficult. And it will be probably, if they don't find a buyer for the club, it will be catastrophic. That was for me the point that it started to be critical.
Okay. And what about you, Tony? When was the moment where you thought we're in real trouble here?
There was an absence of Paul Conway that we thought he was out of the picture, that we were all very happy about, that they gave us the impression that they didn't trust him anymore, or they'd put him a bit on the side and they were going to put new people in, more KVO minded and more business minded towards KVO. And then all of a sudden we have a side of the stadium where Paul always liked to sit in his little settee there with his iPad, doing his data stuff and all stuff like that, And then I came up the stairs and he was there, and we hadn't seen him for quite some time. And he was the last person that I'd expected to see back at the club again. So I said to myself, that's a terrible sign. When everybody's telling me that this guy's off the scene and he's back on it again, then in my eyes, they've given their responsibility to him, and he's got to solve the problem. And when people like that have got to solve a problem, then the problem won't be solved without stepping on people's feet, so sorry, and just doing whatever he wants, And that was his biggest problem. He would never listen to anybody else. And that was my biggest fear then. And certainly when Mark, the other owner, tried to come into the club, I truly also believe, but that will be a topic for later, that Mark really underestimated him. Campbell really underestimated Paul and thought he would be able to push him out. And that was a really sad time then.
Yeah, of course. That's for those who might not know. That's Mark Campbell, who was trying to acquire the club from Paul Conway. Mark Campbell, of course, was behind a consortium called Apex, which has been trying for quite some time to launch its own multi-club ownership model. Mark Campbell tried to acquire, I think, Sunderland in England at one point, and also a club in Scotland where I am based called Falkirk. Both of those didn't come to anything. And that's a really interesting point you made there, Tony, because I know that when Werner van Oosterwijk, who was KVO's administrator, was handling the administrative process, he said quite a lot publicly, which I think was very good about the nature of Paul Conway's intransigence and difficulties there. And you describing it in a way that perhaps Mark Campbell underestimated him, Tony, I think is really interesting. What about you, Bram? Because it sounds like the moment for you was quite early on.
Yeah, well, of course, already in the first season, I noticed a lot of weird things, or at least, let's say, not the real engagement towards the club. Already in the very beginning, Paul Conway said some very weird things, and at that point, we all thought that Paul Conway was the American with a lot of money. Afterwards, we realized that he's never the guy with a lot of money. Other Americans are investing and giving their money to him. And what I realized only later is that guys like Randy Frankel and Christian Souttar, name them, trusted Paul Conway with their money. And of course, why did they do that? Because, like you mentioned earlier, he had a good case with OGC Nice in France. They bought it, I think, for 20 million and sold it about 8 months later for 80 million. But that had nothing to do with their management. That was just a lucky shot. I even remember that I need to write in the press release when they just bought Oostende that in Nice they transformed the club, that they built a whole new youth education complex. But I checked this on the internet. That's not true. That was already there. So Paul Conway went in Miami to certain rich Americans. Hey, let me invest your money in football teams, and I'll make sure you get your money back 4 times more, only like 1 year later, like I did in Nice. So that was his case. Of course, those were all lies, and Randy Frankel and all the other ones also lost quite some money at KV Oostende thanks to the bad management. So these things you learn by experience during the months, during the years. Of course, after the first season, I also saw, we sold Theat, we sold Jack Hendry, Julsager, Bataille. I also want to say that in the first season with Blessing, we still had players from the year before. I think we had an average of 5-6 players who played in the starting lineup. We're already there. So we're no transfers of PMG. With Arthur Theat, they had a very lucky shot. He was just on a trial. And a few years later, he's an international Red Devil. That was a lucky shot. So just to mention, I already had my questions in the first season. Then after the first season finished, we sold all these players. And other players came in who couldn't fill the footsteps of the ones who left. And then when the transfer of Biron happened, when we spent 5 million on him to Nancy, of course, then you start thinking, but what is this? Is this the multi-club ownership model they want? Just giving money to the other clubs. And then in the beginning of, or the end of last season, we got relegated to second division. But then my impression was, okay, the really rich Americans, they realized that in management, daily management, a lot of things went wrong. And they said, okay, we want to work again with more the local people, with local players. Then our youth department manager, Niels van Este, was put in place to handle the sportive side. And with very little money, he realized very good transfers, almost all Belgian players, and the club got its soul a bit back with that. And in the first months, I was optimistic. May, June, even July, I think. I knew Niels had a daily contact with Randy Frankel. And Randy said, Niels, we trust you. We trust the other people there. Just put it in place. And then certainly at one point, all contact was gone. Niels didn't hear anything anymore. Mails were not responded anymore. And then we heard, I think it was through Frank Dirkens, who was still the Flemish president. He said, there was a huge tax claim also on the stands of the stadium. And apparently, after this huge tax claim, Randy Frankel said, "Okay, but now it stops for me here. I'm not gonna pay a tax claim which I don't have anything to do with." And then we realized, okay, they won't put any money anymore in. And then the season started. But you think, okay, we are able still to pay everything. Niels did some additional transfers in the end of August, and you think it will be okay, and a takeover will be accomplished. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And then, like Tony said, in November or December, suddenly Paul Conway steps up back again. He disappeared for several months. He was also pushed away by the other Americans. But suddenly he stepped up again and, reigning the club all over again. And we even asked ourselves questions, but is he still able to do this? Is it still legally able that he does this? And he said, I'm the only one who can save the club. I have a new investor. It was then so-called the Sealy Group, which he tried to introduce also with an interim CEO, Benjamin Erisman, which he was quite okay to work with, to be fair, but it was a difficult situation for him too. So then, like Tony said, I said to people who again trusted Conway, who said, yeah, okay, he's the only person now. Maybe he's screwed up, but he's the only one who can save it. I always said, no, if Paul Conway is the person who needs to save us, forget it. So that's why I was happy that in January, Frank Dirkens and the former CEO, Torsten, went to court and Werner was appointed as administrator, because then I gave us a fair chance to have a takeover. But with Paul Conway, it would have been lost anyway.
Yeah, that kind of brings us kind of quite up to date, because obviously the debts mount, the financial situation deteriorates as well when the communication breaks down, and eventually administrators are appointed. And I just wanted to get a sense of how you felt about the job that Werner van Oosterwijk did, because for me, looking in from the outside, I always thought his communication was very good, and I know he did go quite a long way to reducing the debts that he could. So from his point of view, I think he did an excellent job by KVO, actually. And I don't know, I mean, what do you think about this, Tony? Because you were talking about Mark Campbell perhaps underestimating Paul Conway. Do you think that was perhaps the case with Werner's work as well? Because he did seem genuinely and understandably angry and shocked when it reached the end point, because he was quite certain that, a deal could have happened until the very last minute, when, as we know now, Werner came out very publicly and said, look, Paul Conway has completely changed the goalposts here at the last minute, and that's it.
Yes, Werner came in with 200% honesty. He put the business back in business in KVO. He made the priorities we had before each match meetings. We needed to know who had to be paid to let the match be able to take place. It was really prioritizing everything, because there was a lot of debts everywhere and we needed to know what was happening. So we really needed that. There was a time when the accountant was in the pregnancy holiday. So they had promised to let somebody come in her place to do the work, but that didn't happen. So you can imagine bills are coming and going. Nobody has any sight about it. Nobody knows how much is supposed to be coming in. Nobody knows how much is supposed to be going out. The debts are getting higher and higher. The money that you're owed, you can't get it because they're not receiving the receipts for it. So it was really a terrible, terrible situation. Werner came in. He said, listen, we've got to know what's going on. He elected to have somebody to do the accountancy. To have it, I think they took it nearly 2 weeks to get the accountancy a little bit that everybody could see it, visible, and know what state are we in. So in my eyes, Werner did an absolutely brilliant job. He also, because of this, also looked about the court case with the stand, the tax problem. Also had very interesting talks with Mark Cooker, which was also a player in this whole situation, also speaking with Bart Tommeleng from Stad Oostende, the council. He got everybody involved that needed to be involved, because he wanted really to look for a solution. So anybody that has anything against Werner, and I don't believe there's anybody, because anybody certainly in the club I believe knew that he had really, really good intentions. And if Conway didn't block everything, then I truly believe we might have had a new owner. Whether that would have been better, only time would have told. But I don't, in my eyes, believe it could be any worse than PMG.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting, I think, because, even Werner was, up until the last moment, pretty optimistic that deal could have been done. I actually spoke to a number of other CEOs at other clubs in Belgium round about this time, and one of whom is now left, actually. He's no longer in position. He's gone on he's left football for a little while, and he actually said to me that because he has connections with Bolt Holdings, of course, who own Beveren and a number of other clubs, and he'd actually encountered Mark Campbell before when Mark Campbell was trying to acquire other clubs through his connections at Bolt, and he did actually say to me that he felt that Campbell would probably never get a deal over the line, even if Paul Conway hadn't ultimately sabotaged things at the end. So he felt, and I just thought that was interesting, he felt the overall situation was pretty hopeless anyway, so that even if Paul Conway hadn't changed the goalposts at the last moment, perhaps there would have been an issue with Mark Campbell just because he didn't have a good track record. But I think, from a legal point of view, I mean, Werner kept saying everything is in place, we just need to do the paperwork, it needs to be signed off, the money transfer needs to happen now, and that's when Paul Conway changed the goalposts. Peter, can I ask you actually about that point at the end when Paul Conway changed the goalposts, because we were talking about how Pacific Media Group and Paul Conway obviously doesn't really know how to run a football club. He's proven that, and he's not a football person. Is it your feeling, and this is quite a difficult question to ask as much as it is to answer, do you feel he was set on deliberately allowing the club to die for his own reasons and ends?
I think he did it on purpose, Paul Conway. I'm quite convinced about it, because there are some rules in the States that when you go bankruptcy, you can collect money from one of other trust funds or anything like that. So I think at a certain moment he did it on purpose. I'm quite convinced of that. And by the way, all the supporters were grateful to Werner, because everybody from the supporters know that he did everything he could, not 100%, but 200%, to save the club, to try to find a solution to save the club. But the only person we have to blame, starting and on the final things, is Paul Conway. And there are other persons also who played a role in the bad management, even Belgian people, I'm convinced, that doesn't have played the role as they should have played the role. And I will call the name. It's Torsten Thijs, who was financial responsible for what's happened inside the club. And if you don't have €5, you don't have to buy a player who costs €10. Then you have to say, as financial director to your sportive director, we can't do that. The only thing he did was laughing and making jokes with Gauthier Ganay and drinking a lot of gin. That's my point of view on that. And that made me angry. Everybody was pointing to Paul Conway. But in the years between starting and finish, the two most people who done a lot of wrong things for the clubs is Gauthier Ganay and Torsten Thijs, who weren't honest to the club and to the supporters.
Yeah, I think there's recurring names here, certainly, and I know that Gauthier has been a long time associate of Paul Conway's. Paul Conway has put him into various positions. I mean, the other thing that was always very worrying was that Gauthier for a time was both trying to manage the sporting directors department at KVO and also manage Nancy. I mean, the double relationship there, which is, it's not unusual for sporting directors sometimes to have relationships with other clubs, but to handle both simultaneously on a full-time basis is deeply ludicrous, I think, and nobody thinks that makes any sense at all. And I suppose the next question really is, what have we learned? Because for me, in looking at this, I think you have to have genuinely good football people in key positions in clubs, regardless of how it's run. And when you have a situation where you have an ownership model made of multi clubs in that setup, with people in those clubs who are essentially not qualified to do their jobs, they don't really know what they're doing, and usually one person, in this case Paul Conway, is pulling a lot of strings that he shouldn't, and you have one club, in this case KVO, perhaps the smallest club in the network, who effectively, as Bram was saying, and the Michael Beeron deal is a good example of that, servicing debts that other clubs have to preserve what are considered bigger assets. So there's a real issue here. What do you think are the lessons in this, Tony?
Yeah, to me, you need money to run a club, but it needs to be run in good hands, the right people in the right places. With the appointment of Niels, I find it brilliant. He has football knowledge. He brought in good Belgian players, young players, that if they had a few seasons would grow. And in my eyes, you have to sell your best players each year to be able to survive in football, full stop. The supporters think that's the only way to keep alive in football. Have a good youth system where they're coming through each season, that the youth are motivated to get into the first team. Some of the youth are still living at home, so you don't have to get apartments or houses for them. Do you know what I mean? It's an investment for the future. Infrastructure, everything. So to me, it's very, very important that you do your youth first. Then, like you say, you get the right people in the right time. Communication, very, very important, certainly to the supporters. They have to feel that they're up to date. Bram and Werner did this in the last months, and they were very happy because because of no fault of his own, Bram, his hands were a little bit tied, and he wanted maybe to say a lot more than he could. But it's not an easy position for him. When Werner came along, he said exactly how it was, with all the possibilities. You can't tell everything. You have to wait your moments to say the things that you need to say, But the supporters were so happy because now, after all the time, they were realizing how serious that it was, but at least they knew why. Because if they don't know that, and nobody tells them that, you can presume it, and when you start presuming, you start to think, your imagination goes wild, So to me, it's very, very important. Communication, good people in the right places. And my idea, the American system will never work here with these people. Why? Because they're only in it to make money. And in this level of football, you can't make any money. Full stop.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point about not being able to make money at that level, because when you look at the Challenger Pro League in particular, there's almost no TV money there. So the only way to get out of that division, if that's your aim, is to spend some money and invest it wisely over a short space, which is obviously a very difficult thing for most clubs to do. So I think that's a really good point, Tony. What do you think, Bram, about the sort of long-term lessons are here? Because we know that very recently the general meeting of the Pro League Council, the clubs did vote to tighten the licensing regulations and the due diligence around ownership. Of course, we haven't seen the detail of that yet, and I hope that we do soon. Do you hold out any hope that might make a difference in the future? Because we hope that KVO are the last club that are going to befall a fate like this, but the reality is it's unlikely.
We have to be honest, in Belgium, a lot of clubs have been bankrupt in the past 5 or 10 years. When we look at, for example, our neighbor country, the Netherlands, that's much less. Now we have Vitesse, who is in serious problems. I also want to mention Vitesse was first owned by Russians. Afterwards, an American guy came in to solve the problems. Even Paul Conway was one moment in January in the stands in Vitesse, and he knew this American guy. So maybe not a coincidence that Vitesse is in problems. But if we see that Patro Oostende in Belgium has the same American investors as Vitesse, and in Vitesse, the licensing committee watched it close by for about 6 months and said no to the Americans. They could not invest because there were too many question marks on where the money came from, etc., etc. Here in Belgium, it was no problem with Patro. I also noticed that in the Netherlands, most clubs, I think about 70-80%, are still owned by Dutch people. We also see in the Netherlands that there are some protectional measures towards own youth players. For example, a non-European Union player in Netherlands, the minimum wage is 4 times higher than in Belgium. So these measures make it less interesting for foreign investors to come to Netherlands. So there are more protection systems involved. I think Belgium is leaning more and more towards a country or a competition where everything is possible. All foreign investors are coming here, and they are telling because it's interesting because of the Red Devils, who are number one on the FIFA ranking, and thanks of the good youth departments of Anderlecht, Genk, Standard. That's probably partially true, but it's also true that in Belgium, a lot of things can happen which are more difficult in other countries. So therefore, the licensing committee should be maybe more severe already from the start and look into foreign money, and maybe also look after 6 months how it's going over there. I think we also need to realize in Belgium, to be honest, we cannot compete with the Premier League nor even the Championship and other competitions. I think if you go maybe, for example, we are now 6th or 7th on the UEFA ranking. Let's say we become 10th, but 80% of the clubs plays with 6 or 7 own youth players in the team. I think the stadiums will be full anyway. So I think we have to maybe think about our role in football with maybe super leagues and everything that is coming, how to make it more attractive to the own people in Belgium. And then I also come back to things like Tony said, with foreign investors, it's much more difficult to do the communication. There will be good examples. Union Saint-Gilloise, for example, is a fantastic example of how a club needs to be run, and they are also part of the Bristol system. But the good communication is so important. I said this to Werner when he came in. The fans, they expect transparency, and Werner was immediately on the same level on that topic with me, so I was very happy with that. I also have to say, Peter mentioned Torsten. I had quite a good relationship with Torsten. We had our conflicts from time to time, but we always managed that. But for me, the problem with Torsten was in his role of financial guy. He needed to be the boss. He needed to be able to say to Gauthier, you cannot do this or this. But Gauthier was appointed CEO, so Torsten was actually below Gauthier in the hierarchy. So that was a bit of a problem in the management structure of the club. I don't know whether it's a good idea if a sportive director is also the CEO of the club. So I hope lessons will be learned. But I'm not saying that I'm totally against foreign investors. It can be good, but only if you attract the good foreign investors. And we need to be honest, in Belgium, that happens not so many times. Look at Standard, also American guys. Look at Harry de Molenbeek with John Texter, also American guys. So a lot of examples where it's not managed good, where there is no local management involved anymore, where there is no engagements to the fans, no communication whatsoever, and moreover, a lot of financial mismanagement. So a lot of lessons need to be learned from that, and I hope this happens.
Yeah, you mentioned Patro Eisden there. Obviously, Coley Parry is the link there with Vitesse. Just in the last few days as well, news has emerged that Denza's owners, they're owned by a Singapore-based investment firm who have a stake in, I think, Charlton and Torremolinos in Spain. They are looking at options to sell Denza because of the large debts that their group has run up as well. So these fundamental issues are cropping up again, despite the intentions of a lot of good people inside clubs as well. I was going to ask you, Peter, as well about what you felt the lessons were, because you've obviously been very close to the fan base on the ground as all of this has developed as well, and that's obviously been personally a very painful thing to be a part of.
Yeah, that's true. That's for us now so important that we can continue in a way that's really necessary. But going back on the other thing is, I think that UEFA and FIFA has to play a role in the multi-owner club. They have to, if someone like Paul Conway is proved that he mismanaged more than one club in his multi-owner club, I think those people should be banned from worldwide football. And you do that with one guy, you can do that with a second guy, and the lessons will be learned. There will be an end of that in sight. But the only thing we can hope is that a lot of people and a lot of other clubs and a lot of other supporters take lessons from what we have gone through and maybe we were a little bit too soft as supporters, just until the end in actions against Paul Conway and PMG. It was only the last 2-3 months before it was fatal that we had some good actions against those managers. But now we are convinced that as supporters group, we are convinced that in the future we will be closer, investing and looking to what's happened inside the new club. And that's very important. That's what Bram said also, the German way, the 51-49 rule. I think it's important, necessary that in Belgium there must always be a delegation of supporters inside the club, not as to make decisions inside the club, but be part of it, that you can put directly the finger on an item that you see as supporter is not correct, and that you can directly appoint to the president, vice president, CEO, COO, whoever it may be, that you can say, can you explain it correctly? And if it's not 100% okay for what will happen in the future to the club, I don't say you need to have a veto, but you can say, we warned you, if you continue with that, we can take actions. That's the most important thing that I've learned.
I want to add something on what Peter said on FIFA and UEFA. Yeah, that's correct. I don't know when FIFA and UEFA will restrict foreign ownership, but also multi-club ownership. I'm not a big fan of multi-club ownership, to be fair, because I think mostly there's one bigger team and then the rest is smaller, which is not always necessarily a bad thing. But I think you lose also a bit your identity, because we are looking more and more to franchises competing against each other than to individual clubs with their own DNA. And that is leaning over to the American way of looking into sports. And I think it's a bad situation happening in European football. So it's about time UEFA and FIFA step up. I want to go back to the RWD Molenbeek situation. So John Texter owns Molenbeek and Lyon in France. So we had our Biron deal, but Molenbeek buys a player of 20 million euros, while their own budget is maybe 5 or 10 million euros. They buy him because Lyon has a transfer ban. So these situations that their FIFA or UEFA need to say, stop, this cannot happen anymore. So it's about time they step up to these things.
Yeah, so it sounds like two things need to happen. Regulations need to be tightened in lots of different ways, and the footballing community, worldwide actually, not just in Belgium, but worldwide, needs to try and act collectively to address this. Because, as Bram was saying, I think the system in the Netherlands has been reasonably successful at preventing scenarios like this. But, Vitesse, obviously, I've got into real trouble and still are. So even their successes haven't completely prevented this either. We should probably bring the story kind of up to date. There is some positive news that we can talk about, and in a way, it's rather fortunate we're recording today, because as I understand, the first training tonight is with the new club. A new club has emerged, KV Diksmuide Oostende, KVDO. Bram, could you give us a little bit of context into the merger and the circumstances around that, because this is an exciting moment and a great moment after a long period of difficulty.
So let's rewind to the 2nd of June. We had the funeral of KV Oostende inside the stadium then. And about that time, or in May, a few people were looking into solutions to make a restart for KV Oostende. I was involved in this. Also, the mayor of Oostende, Bart Tommelijn, played a huge part in it. Werner was involved back then, and also the people from our youth departments. So at first, a new construction was made by a few honest sponsors of the youth department to get a restart done for the youth, because that was the main important thing. That was quite fast settled, thanks to these sponsors and thanks to the people from the youth department. But still, there was no solution for the first team then. So we had no other option than to go look for another club, because plan A was actually to restart in the first provincial league. That's one league lower than the one we are starting in now. But that could have been a solution to restart as KV Oostende with the 31 inauguration number, with the own colors, everything. But a few things need to happen for that. At first, about 300,000 euros needs to be paid to the Football Federation of Belgium, because those were still the debts we had towards them. Okay, that was I think doable. But then the Football Federation said, yeah, but even still, if you restart and, for example, a manager or a player or whoever who has still owes some money from KV Oostende could still go to the 31 number, even if you're an amateur club then, and ask the money back. And then you're in big trouble. So unfortunately, that was not a solution. That's also the reason why all other clubs who go bankrupt in Belgium, they merge together with another club. So maybe there needs to come a solution for that too, but that's another discussion then. So then we started talking with different clubs within a 30-kilometer range, because that was also a rule. One moment we had talks with Knokke, but for example, that was not possible because the state from stadium till stadium, that was 31 kilometers. So 1 kilometer too much. So yeah, to make it a bit ridiculous, but that's the rules are the rules, and that was it. So we were talking with different teams. We had good chats with Bredene, with Blankenberge, and then one point, the mayor of Oostende had a chat with Karel van Nieuwkerke, who is a famous TV presenter in Belgium, and who is vice president of Diksmuide. They had a good chat, and they were talking a bit about the situation of Oostende, and they were talking about, okay, why can we not do something together? And then everything went quite fast. We went with a delegation of Oostende to Diksmuide. Karel and his other people over there of the management gave a presentation where they wanted to go, how they are working. And basically within 10 days, there was an intention agreement to work together. So everything went really, really fast. And I think probably the best solution that is possible for a restart of our club. Because some people now ask me, yeah, but okay, this is not the real KVO anymore. Then I reply them, okay, there's a slide of blue who comes into our three colors already. There is KVDO and not KVO anymore. But I asked them back, was it still the real KVO in the past 2 years, for example? I think the new team will be playing with 10 or 11 players, which were in some parts of their youth education grow up at the youth department of KV Oostende. So all guys will be local based. And I know it's easier to do this in lower leagues than in professional leagues, but still, that's the situation. So I think there can be a good connection with the two teams together merging, and with the fans. And I think Rome is not built on in one day. We need to realize that. But I think it might be a very good solution, and maybe the beginning of a nice new story.
Yeah, we very much hope so. And from your perspective, Tony and Peter, is there a sense on both your parts that there's a real support behind this merger and goodwill for it to go on a new journey now?
For me personally, when I left KV Oostende, we were just relegated at first division to second division. That was in 94, I think, 94, 95. I then went to Diksmuide. So I already had a connection there. So when I heard Diksmuide was interested, that made me happy, because it was always, for me personally, a homey club, a family club. You know, they gave me always a good feeling there when I was there. It was also Karel van Nieuwkerke. Back in the day, he interviewed me when I was working in my restaurant. He worked for Focus TV then. And he was a really nice, pleasant guy, an honest guy, an ambitious guy. So I'm not really surprised what he's achieved now, because you felt it then back in the day that he was somebody that knew where he was going. And I truly believe they got good intentions for the new club. And for me, the KV Oostende supporters, KV Oostende doesn't exist anymore. The supporters have got to get that into their head. Once they can get that into their head and move on, then they will accept the new club. Like Bram said, there's 11 from the players that have got a history from KVO, from youth situations or whatever, you know. So for me, that it is a special bond that has already been formed, you know. So I'm really, really happy with the situation. And to be honest, when I saw the situation that we was in, nobody in their right mind would have taken over the club, the situation that it was, because to be honest, you're first, in my eyes, minimum 10 million euros in the sky, and nobody wants to lose money. So the only person that could have taken it over was somebody that was really rich, didn't mind losing that, and really wanted to invest it. That's not a problem. But anybody that's coming to the club with so much debt and thinking they're going to make money, done. So in my eyes, it sounds really bad, but the buy cement is the only way to solve that problem without getting a really rich person that was prepared to waste his first 10 million euros. But I see it going forward now, and I've got a really good feeling about it. And if things can get sorted now, because it's one thing deciding you found somebody that wants to take over the club or come to the stadium to play, but the logistics and the workings. We've got a beautiful stadium. The stadium needs to be managed. You know, it hasn't been played for a while. Okay, they're doing the grass now, so that's important, you know. But the stands, what stands are going to be open? I personally there was a beverage manager there, so I did all the drinks from the whole stadium. That was a stadium where they had 4 tanks from 4,000 litres, 16,000 litres of beer that went around the stadium. That's 16,000 half pints, you know. So they've got installations there set up for a big club, but now you're going to have to start from not zero. So we have to really know how they're going to be working. They're all things that really need to be discussed. Who's going to work there? Carl already had a lovely video last week about they want volunteers to come into the club because obviously they haven't got money to pay them, you know. So they're all things that now have to go into place because they're going to start training tonight. The games are going to come closer and closer. There will be a time when they've got to come to the stadium to play in. And Carl is really in a position now where he's just done the ECAR 2024 on television. He's now busy with the Tour de France. You know, it's such a busy time for him. I hear he's also leaving for the Olympics. You know, so in my eyes, not personally against Carl, but he really needs to maybe have a right hand that he can push things onto to get things sorted, because the time is coming closer and closer. And I personally was supposed to speak to him already this week, beginning of last week, because he was going to speak to me about the workings of how he saw it in the stadium itself and what bars. And I haven't heard from him yet, you know, so I knew he was very, very busy, but the time is getting closer and closer and closer now. And in my eyes, if Carl hasn't got time to do it, then give somebody that you trust and your word and let them take over a few things, because things really have to start getting set up now.
And do you share that sense of optimism, Peter? Because it sounds like the early foundations for the new club do indeed sound positive because of as Bram was saying, that there are some significant local Oostende-based kind of connections there that are I think, a very good thing.
Since the 2nd of June, when we held the funeral of KVO, with a group of supporters, we started with a supporters collective. It was something which was apart from the supporters federation, because we saw the supporters federation was KVO based. So we needed something else, because we want to, as supporters group, we want to involve also supporters from Diksmuide in the story, in the complete story. So in what we feel is that about between 70 and 80% of the supporters will go into the story of the new club. If I feel the willing that there is from a lot of supporters to go tonight to Diksmuide to see the first training, I think then at that moment when we will see there 20, maybe 30, 40 people from Oostende to watch that first training, then you can say, okay, we kicked off to something that can grow and that can become a really good West Flemish story. And I'm convinced that when everybody pulls on the same string in the right direction, with the right mentality, that it can be really become a good success. And let's hope that before I get 70, that we will play in second division. So we have 10 years to go back in second division, and then I will be happy.
Yes, well, I certainly hope so, because, of course, we know that Lokeren, or Lokeren Temps as they're now known, went bankrupt not too long ago, of course, within the last 4 years, and they are now a Challenger Pro League side. So, it is possible. It absolutely is possible. And certainly myself and Ben and Joris here at the Belgian Football Podcast wish you all the best. And maybe when me and the guys are together in Belgium next, we'll be able to meet with you at a game, because we would very much like to do that. And in fact, Oostende was actually on our list to visit, to come to a game, obviously, before events reached an unfortunate conclusion last month. But we certainly want to come out, and hopefully we can time that when KVDO are playing. We would like that very much. I would like to thank you so much, guys, for joining us and giving us some time here in the Belgian Football Podcast, because I felt it was so important for us to be able to speak to some individuals who had such a personal connection to the club and who had been involved inside the club, because it's quite easy for me to talk and share the context with individuals, because I watch things very closely, as somebody outside Belgium for non-Belgian audiences who might have an interest in Belgian football. But it's such an important story to tell. So to get your first-hand accounts of the last few months and indeed years has been really valuable. And I think listeners are going to really get a lot out of this episode, fans of other clubs as well, and hopefully take some lessons away, particularly that one about tightening regulations and collective responsibility. So thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. It was lovely. It's a pity you missed the third time in Oostende. I didn't know if you heard about that when they had the parties after the match, win, lose or draw. It was a wonderful time, so maybe it might come back again.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will, with many of the same individuals involved.
There were some English podcasters who went to the after party, and they made some online videos about it, so you can look them up.
Yeah.
And the purpose is to continue this with KVDO.
Yeah, excellent. No, we look forward to it, and we'll be following your story very, very closely. That's just about it for this special episode of the Belgian Football Podcast. If you like what we do here at the BFP, you know how to get in touch with us on social media. Our next episode will be dropping with you very, very soon, and the season is about to kick off, so we'll be back with you regularly on a weekly basis. So until then, we'll speak to you very soon on another episode of the Belgian Football Podcast.